Right. Hi, everyone. Uh, this is Shreeram, and I will take you through this session on Antarctica today. We're just waiting for a few more people to join in, so I think we'll get started off, and as people join in, they would. So yeah, so good afternoon, and welcome to the session on Antarctica. And yeah, for me, it is like a super magical place. I hope I'm audible to everyone. And okay, cool. So just a quick housekeeping thing in case you have any questions during the session or if the voice is not coming through or just put it in the chat and we'll take care of that. I'll pause for questions a couple of times during the presentation where we'll probably sum up everything till there and take the questions from there. So yeah, so I always like to start off my presentations of Antarctica with this photograph. This is from my first ever trip to the continent. And this still is this is the image that I wanted to capture when I went there. This was somehow, there was a vague picturization of how I would have wanted to photograph Antarctica. And it was with the snow falling and, a penguin or something which would be actually enjoying, somebody that is actual resident of Antarctica enjoying the atmosphere. And this was a day with very heavy snowfall, hadn't slept the previous night. And they're out there photographing, cameras were completely wet, and but there was this beautiful moment happening, and I was like, okay, I still have half the trip left, but it's okay. This is what I've come here to capture, and even if my camera conks off, I should be okay with it. Thankfully, the camera ran beyond that, but yeah, so this is the magic of Antarctica for me. Uh, a quick introduction to those of you who don't know me or if we haven't met. I'm Shreeram. I am a professional wildlife photographer. I am a co-founder and a photography and travel mentor at Data Photography. Uh, my background, I've not, so photography happened over a period of time. I discovered photography, I discovered wildlife, I discovered nature, and I moved on from a corporate career into becoming a photographer and a photography guide. So that's my intro in brief. I've been to Antarctica 3 times so far, and I'm really, really looking forward to going back again later this year, but more about that towards the end of the presentation. I run a company called Data Photography. We've been running data since 2011, so it's more than 13 years now. And we've been focused on travel, photography, travel around the globe with the focus on discovering new experiences, new places, trying to reach places which are not easily accessible, and also build those experiences which are unique. And we are a small team, but we are a passionate team of professional photographers and mentors uh, that run the company. Manish is also on the meet right now. Manish leads a lot of trips. He this year he's going to be leading trips to Kyrgyzstan, Iceland, all those places which I would really, really love to explore at some point. So while we get warmed up on the presentation, I have a very quick set of questions for you. And here are two animals we associate with the polar regions. And let me see if I can bring up this poll out there. So yeah, so there is this poll out there where I have a question for all of you. How many penguins does a polar bear eat per day? I'm going to leave it on for another couple of minutes, couple of seconds, and then cool. So I'm actually very glad at how the poll numbers are stacking up. A bunch of you have said none of the above, which is actually the right answer. Uh, so I'm just going to end this poll. So most of you have actually answered with none of the above. There's a couple of you who have said one to four, but that's because both of them are poles apart. Polar bears live in the North Pole or around the North Pole, and penguins are largely restricted to the southern hemisphere. So there is, unless it's a zoo, there is no chance of a polar bear coming across a penguin in the wild. So in fact, that's one of the reasons these regions are also called Arctic and Antarctic. Arctic is the place where bears are. Arctic comes from Arctos for bears, and of course, the opposite of Arctic is Antarctica, and that's where there are no bears. So that's how yeah, the words also the places also get their names. So yeah, so no polar bears. Polar bears don't feed on penguins at all. Uh, so let me go through, the adventure that is Antarctica as such. And this is one of the mammals that you get there. Seals. Again, we'll talk about these a little later down the presentation. So where is Antarctica? And this is actually one of the reasons Antarctica caught my fascination. This was one of the first few places where I've actually explored wildlife outside India. For a very long time, I was exploring wildlife because India is a huge country and India has a diversity of landscapes which is probably unmatched. There are probably very few countries in the world which have the kind of diversity of landscapes or the kind of diversity of fauna that we get in India. And for a very long time, I was concentrated on exploring the different places in India. But when I started exploring wildlife outside, Antarctica was one of the first few places that I went to. And that was surely because the remoteness of the place was one of the big factors that contributed to me getting fascinated with it. And you can see on the board, everything is thousands of kilometers. And if you notice, everything is pointed one way, everything is pointed to the north, because Antarctica is far, far south of everything else. And that is where Antarctica is, right? If you take the way the globe is represented, it's right at the bottom of the globe. It's in the southernmost most corner of the globe. And if you actually see, the distances from different places to Antarctica, you would actually notice that the shortest journey is from South America to Antarctica. That is the smallest uh, stretch of ocean that one has to cross to reach Antarctica. But if it is such a short stretch, why is it that a continent such as Antarctica was unknown and there's never been a permanent human settlement? If you look at the north, if you look at the Arctic region, there are settlements as far high as probably about 80 degrees north. But there is nothing at Antarctica is hardly about 60 degrees south. So, or starts rather at 60 degrees south. And that there's never been a human settlement. In fact, humans didn't know about Antarctica till very recently. So, why is it that it has never been inhabited? So we'll come to that in a minute, but this is one of the quick introductions to Antarctica. It's a land of extremes. It's the coldest continent. It's the driest continent. It's the windiest. It's also the highest continent. It's got the highest average altitude of any continent. It's the fifth largest. Minus 89.2 degrees Celsius was recorded in Antarctica. Of course, it was peak winter right in the middle of the continent. 98% of the continent is covered in ice, averaging about 1.9 kilometers of thickness. We've been talking about freshwater and issues of water around summer in Bangalore and stuff, but Antarctica holds about 90% of the world's freshwater, which is stored inside the ice sheet that covers the continent. Despite so much water being there, Antarctica is also considered to be a polar desert. And that's why it's called the driest continent, because inland Antarctica there are places which haven't received rainfall in over 2 million years. And like I said, it was never permanently inhabited by people. These days, with research facilities um, being scattered across the continent, a temporary population of between 1,000 and 5,000 varies by the year. and by the season, of course, is what is settle is the only human habitation that we have on the continent. Uh, so the expedition, right? And for me, like when I started looking up on Antarctica, there was a lot of things that, of course, a lot of questions that I had in mind, and I wanted to kind of also be there on the right expedition. Somehow, the first time that I went there, I had just started about researching, and somebody, pointed me towards an expedition group that was doing a trip to Antarctica. This was way back in 2017, and I was like, yeah, I've been looking up about this, and it was like just about one of those moments where you start thinking about a place, and something just manifests out of it. So I said, okay, let me check this out, and I started reading up about it. And some of the questions that I had at that point of time, and some of the things that I started working on was, is this going to be the right time? What is the season? What is the month? When can I get to Antarctica as such? And this trip was in the first week of December that it had happened. And I started looking up the timetable for when, what's a good time to be, on the Antarctic Peninsula and things. And I realized that the season starts about late October or early November and goes on till about March. And I really liked this early on in the season because very few ships would have reached Antarctica by then. The seas are just kind of opening up. A lot of the landing sites that we have on these expeditions are just opening up. So it kind of is a great time to be there. Lots of snow uh, still there. The penguins are just about starting to build their nests. So there's a lot of activity as well. The seals have already come there. The whales are already there. So there's good activity of everything around that time, and I really liked that season. But then, of course, as the season progresses, there are different things to expect. Like towards, of course, towards the end of December, early Jan, there's a lot of holiday traffic that goes in. So more ships keep running full. They're on premium. Uh, Later on in the season, once the penguins have finished their nesting, they go back to the sea, and so the penguin colonies start emptying up over a period of time. But of course, the whales are also getting ready to head back, so there's a lot more playful activity. So there's through the Antarctic summer, there is really no bad time to be there. It's about what you want to see and what you want to experience as such. Then for me, the other aspect was the expedition company. And going so far, I wanted to make sure that I was in capable hands, people who understood the place, people who understood how to run these expeditions. Things to pack was actually quite simple because I was going in summer, and 2017 also happened to be the year when I first did my snow leopard expedition, and I had already experienced minus 30 degrees. So Antarctica in summers is about -5, so it was pretty much like a walk in the park. And travel to Antarctica, traveling to the other side of the globe, literally was one of the things that I was a little, I would say, uh, scared of, if you will. But then I was like, okay, I want to be there. It's an opportunity that has come through, so I must do it. And I realized that it's actually not that big a deal. It's about a 25-hour flight from here to get to uh, Argentina, and from there, it actually the expedition is actually very very smooth. And I'll kind of talk about this when we talk about the expedition later on. So the first stop when we actually head out to Antarctica. So a lot of Antarctic expeditions start off either in Argentina or in Chile. All the ones that I have been on so far have started off at this place called Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world. It is located at the southern end of the Patagonian range. This is a place called Tierra del Fuego. It's a small group of islands towards the end of South America, towards the southern end of South America rather. And that's Ushuaia. Ushuaia is a town that at one point of time was the hub of electronics industry for Argentina. Now it is also it's well known for it being a starting point for most Antarctic expeditions. So that's the town. It's not a very large town, but it's set in such a beautiful setting with snow-capped mountains all around. Yeah, that was one of the um, photos of the mountains around Ushuaia. And there's a lot of stuff to do there itself. Like, typically you reach a day early and you spend the first half of the expedition day around Ushuaia. And there's plenty of stuff to do, like just going around the place. So you start seeing penguins right in Ushuaia itself. Like there is a small boat journey that you have to do, and you get to this island where there are Magellanic penguins and Gentoo penguins, all of them nesting there. So even before you get to Antarctica, you can actually start off with a glimpse of penguins. And there's a whole bunch of other things as well. A lot of them which are concentrated, which are Patagonian uh, birds that you get around the area. So Zaplandu, Magellanic woodpecker. There's a whole bunch of raptors as well that you get there. Turkey vultures, caracaras. There's a massive kingfisher called the ring kingfisher. This is about, I think, about 45 centimeters bigger. So it's a massive bird. And you get this bird called skua. We'll also see a South Polar skua later on in the presentation, but skuas are again birds that you kind of come across around Ushuaia. And of course, it's time to board the expedition cruise. And yeah, they'll be waiting for you there, of course. Uh, So the first day, typically you reach there, you kind of go around Ushuaia. There's a lot. Either you go to birding, either you can go to Tierra del Fuego National Park, or there's a whole bunch of cafes and all around Ushuaia. So depending on what one feels like, there's enough and more activities to do around there. And typically towards the afternoon, you get onto the ship, and of course check into your cabin and relax around. And the ship starts sailing away from Ushuaia, and you get into something called the Beagle Channel. So the Beagle Channel is this narrow stretch that separates the Argentinian islands and the Chilean islands on the other side. It's this narrow channel that leads out into the Southern Ocean. The seas are still quite calm, and you're surrounded by like absolutely beautiful sights. Like the Beagle Channel again has mountains on both sides. This is the southern edge of Patagonia. So it's got these amazing snow-capped mountains on both sides. Uh, you see some wildlife as well on the way. You see the South American sea lions. The first albatrosses also start coming into view. You start seeing black-browed albatrosses, quite large birds again. And it's usually a nice, quiet, calm sunrise before we head into the Southern Ocean. And here's the reason why uh, Antarctica remained undiscovered for a very long time. There's this tiny little passage of sea called the Drake Passage. This typically takes us about a couple of days from South America to Antarctica in the modern vessels. But this passage of sea is one of the stormiest passages in the world. And earlier vessels, earlier ships, more than 200 years ago, were really not built to or equipped to handle such rough seas. And why is it rough? I just put a quick representation of the globe here. So if you actually look at the, the southern arm of South America and the Antarctic Peninsula reaching out, there is this narrow little passage. Everything around it, the sea is actually quite wide. There is no large landmass that kind of comes as close to Antarctica as South America does. So what happens is the sea that is rotating around Antarctica, right? When it reaches the peninsula and South American, that point where the sea becomes the narrowest, it kind of becomes like a funnel. So suddenly there's a lot of storms, a lot of winds, a lot of waves, everything kind of coming in, at that point because of suddenly the sea narrowing from a nice wide ocean, right? So it kind of becomes, so sometimes you suddenly start getting these very massive storms, massive waves and things like that. And that's why it is considered to be one of the stormiest seas in the world. And because of the Southern Ocean, rotating all around the continent of Antarctica, that is what gives it its unique climate, which makes it the coldest continent on the planet. This it's like so we have when you're at 60 degrees south, you're already in Antarctica. It's far colder than it is at 60 degrees north, right? Because of the currents that kind of go all around the continent. They keep the temperatures really, really cold. And because of this, again, because of these cold temperatures, because the seas freeze all the way up to the peninsula and above in winters, the journey to Antarctica is only possible in the summer months. Beyond that, the continent is pretty much closed for 6 months. So people who are actually working there on research, they are literally closed there for 6 months. They cannot head back home even if they want to, because of the 24-hour darkness, and two, because it just becomes impossible to navigate that piece of sea to kind of get to Antarctica. So, and that was the reason Antarctica was also secret, like I mentioned, till about about 2 centuries ago. 1773, 74, James Cook came within 120 kilometers, uh, but he could never reach Antarctica. 1819, William Smith sighted Livingston Island in the South Shetlands, and he was able to land on another island in the South Shetlands called the King George Island. And in 1820 was probably the first time that Antarctica or its ice shelf were actually sighted by three different ships uh, in that particular year. So it was only in about 1820 that we had a confirmed existence of this massive landmass far south. So it's hardly what 204 years back. So once we hit the Drake Passage, right, we are in the classroom because we talked about really rough seas and stuff. So we are sitting in the classroom and listening to historical stuff like this, or or things like what I talked about, the coldest continent on the planet. So we learn a lot more about Antarctica. We learn a lot more about its climate. We learn a lot more about its wildlife, about its geology, and things like that. So it's a great way to start understanding the place that we are going to be traveling to. And the Drake Passage, of course, there are times when we call it the Drake Lake. And let me run a quick video for you. It can be actually absolutely calm. And this kind of calmness, I've probably seen it a complete voyage. I've seen it once or one out of 6 times. Couple of times it's been a mix of a Drake Lake and a little bit of waves. But then sometimes you also end up with the Drake Shake, where you can have these massive waves. And of course, modern vessels are built to withstand the Drake Shake. And the captain and the expedition team, of course, they make calls based upon how the weather is. And, they might either speed up the journey or, slow down the journey depending, or take a break sometimes to make sure that we don't hit the roughest patches. But then, yeah, like 10-meter waves are not very uncommon in the Drake Passage. Uh, it's just that, yeah, you're pretty much room bound, or, you're sitting and listening to lectures during that time uh, till you kind of cross through the Drake Passage. So, yeah. But having such rough seas is also a blessing in disguise, because this guy is often seen only in the roughest of seas, the wandering albatross, because the rough seas churn out a lot of nutrients, which bring in a lot of fish towards that part of the ocean. So you have birds like the wandering albatross. The wandering albatross has the longest wingspan of any bird. And just watching them, follow the ship is just such an amazing moment, because it's just so easy to get blown away by how huge these birds are and how effortlessly they just glide over the ocean. They just literally don't flap their wings. These are birds that actually remain seaborne for about, I think, after the bird takes off from its nest, it doesn't go back to nest for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. So it is just gliding over the southern seas for 3 to 4 years before it ever goes back to land. Just such cool animals. Of course, a whole lot of other albatrosses also that we kind of come across. There are many, many species of them in the Southern Ocean. This is a light mantled albatross. And other relatives of that albatrosses, these are also called tube noses because they have a little tube above their beak which helps them, get rid of the salt because they spend so much time over the sea and they feed so much on, on the fish and other this one. They get exposed to a lot of salt, and the tube helps them expel the excess salt out of them. So you have fulmars, you have giant petrels, and very soon, of course, the seas start getting much calmer, and you realize that yeah, we are getting close. And typically, there's also most of these ships have a competition where they ask you to guess the time of when they're going to come across the first iceberg, because icebergs start appearing only when you're getting close to Antarctica. And I think on the last voyage, last January, someone from our team had actually won that contest as well. So that was like super awesome. But you start seeing icebergs at some point of time. Start off with like you get to see these massive ones floating around, and very soon you start seeing the South Shetland Islands. The South Shetland Islands are these group of islands that adjoin the Antarctic Peninsula. Uh, like extreme formations. A lot of them are very, very mountainous or hilly kind of thing with very different landscapes as such. And of course, colonies of penguins start appearing very soon as well. So yeah, so that is the overall map of the peninsula and the South Shetland Islands. So it's that small group of islands that adjoin the Antarctic Peninsula. And of course, when you're coming from the north, those are the first set of islands that we actually reach. And of course, at some point of time, we realize that the ship has come to a halt. And you look out of the window, and there is this magnificent landscape all around, just still. There's nothing moving. You're not in motion anymore. You've been moving for 2 days. And finally, the ship kind of comes to a halt. Uh, and of course, time for exploration. So once the ship is stopped, we're going to head out and we're going to see what Antarctica holds for us. This is some pictures from my first expedition. This was my first landing on Antarctica. This is a place called Yankee Harbor. I was just mesmerized because this was a beautiful sunny day. We just landed. Like it was a beach. It was a beautiful cobblestone beach. Plenty of penguins running all around the place. It was just unbelievable. I think I must have shot some. I don't know. I filled up my cards that day, that evening for 2 hours because just so much of activity happening out there. Uh, so yeah, and these guys are also pretty cool because whenever there is snow, it's tough to walk on snow. And when you have feet as small as penguins do, it's even tougher probably. So they make these beautiful highways through the snow where they, follow each other again and again and again. They use the same route so that the snow kind of gets more even. They don't have to, you know, make their way through, probably knee-high snow or whatever. So it becomes a lot more easier for them. So these penguin highways are again pretty cool. You actually see them all over the place wherever there are penguin colonies. And it's fun to also watch them because these guys are, some of them, because they use these rocks for nesting and stuff. Whenever they find a stone, they would go, if it looks nice, they'll go pick it up and put it in the nest, add it to the nest. Sometimes they also find those stones in other penguins' nests. So these fellows could just walk around, find a nice thing, and steal from another thing. So they're not really the benign comical creatures that they look like. They are up to a lot of antics over there as well. But yeah, just seeing them in that open wilderness is quite amazing to experience. So that was a quick thing about how to get to Antarctica and things. A very quick thing on the history of the continent as such. So uh, there is this time period between the late 1800s and the early 1900s where it was called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Because this was the time when there was a lot of interest about figuring out things about the continent between uh, the 1820s and the 1890s. Antarctica was largely used as a base for hunting seals and whales because the early explorers figured out that there was a bounty here. There was just incredible numbers of whales and seals which could be hunted, and the whale oil was used to light lamps in houses and streets and stuff. So there was a lot of that thing that had started off. But it was only as we got towards the late 1800s and the early 1900s that there was also this whole thing of, okay, like, how can we discover more about the continent, what lies inland, and how do we actually survive on a continent like this. And I think 1898 was the first time that a crew overwintered in Antarctica. Otherwise, it would just be a summer thing. They would go spend summer and come back. 1899 was the first time that people actually went there. They built huts. They actually stayed on the land as such. And 1901, Captain Scott led his first expedition trying to find the South Pole, because that was one of the dreams. Finding the North Pole, finding the South Pole were these big dreams. And there were two people who were really, really interested in doing that, Captain Scott and Captain Amundsen. And Scott tried it first in 1901. He was forced to turn back after 2 months from 82 degrees south because the entire team was suffering from snow blindness, scurvy, a lot of other issues. It was in December 1912, that Roald Amundsen led a five-man expedition to the South Pole, and they were able to reach the geographic South Pole and plant their flag over there. The unfortunate part, or the unfortunate side of this exploration, was around the same time, Scott was also on an expedition from a very different route to reach the South Pole. And he got there just about a month later. He got there about 35 days later, only to discover that he had been beaten by Amundsen. It was such a very narrow gap. Uh, but then it's also a very tragic tale because on the way back, they lost their way. They were stuck in very bad weather and stuff. And the entire team of five, they perished about 11 miles from the nearest supply depot. They didn't know where they were. They just didn't know that they had to get about 11 miles to get to a supply depot. And it was only next summer that their bodies were ever discovered. Uh, Again, so there's a lot of these tales of Antarctica about, this one. Shackleton's name comes up a lot of times in relation to Antarctica because Shackleton mounted a lot of expeditions. He wasn't able to get to the South Pole and things like that. But for him, each of those expeditions, or most of those expeditions, are testimony to his captainship. Because in 1915-17, which is probably the most famous of their expeditions, their ship Endurance went into sea ice, and then a bunch of them, including Shackleton, actually took a small rowboat and they rowed the boat all the way to the South Shetlands, which are many thousands of kilometers away. And they actually mounted a rescue of their team that was stuck in Antarctica. So it was quite a bit of an achievement to kind of get there with the kind of ships that they had at that time. But nowadays, of course, the ships are a lot more uh, advanced. They are technically very advanced. They can handle a lot of ice. They're all built for different ice classes. A lot more comfortable as well. And it takes about 2 days for us to get there. So this is typically, so once we reach Antarctica, we spend about 4 or 5 days the uh, around the peninsula, around the South Shetland Islands. And this is one of the expeditions that we did where we landed at different landing points. So typically what happens is around Antarctica, there are a bunch of landing points that have been designated by this association of all the expedition companies. There are about 30 of them. And depending on the weather, depending on the availability of these landing, because they don't want two ships to land at the same point at a single time. So there is this booking of slots for different landing points. So they want to make sure that you have an exclusive experience. You want to be the only ship in the area, and you land there, and it's only your team that actually goes out there and sees the place and comes back. So depending on that, the landing points change by the voyage. But each of them, as in I've been to probably about close to about 17 to 18 of them. and I don't remember any of them which is like uh, which was disappointing or whatever. Like each of them is phenomenal because each of them gives you a very different perspective of Antarctica. Each of them has a very different view of the continent and the South Shetland Islands, and it's quite fascinating to just walk around and explore. Sometimes it need not be walking around. Sometimes you would also take like a zodiac cruise. So your boats, the ones that I had showed earlier, the black color boats. So you would kind of go around the area, just looking at icebergs, looking at what's on the iceberg. Sometimes you get a lot of seals. Sometimes in that area, there's going to be a lot of whales. So you also get up close with whales and things. So it could be an interesting experience even if you just don't get on to land for that particular excursion because you get some very interesting things to watch out. So yeah, so here's a few glimpses of the ice continent, and yeah, that was from one of the initial landings. It's quite bleak and stark because there's just no human activity. It's just so far away, and that whole feeling of remoteness, it's that whole feeling of uh, being a continent which is so far away that actually comes through which with most of the landscapes. It just looks so amazing, majestic. Uh, this is one of my favorite places. It's a place called Deception Island. And Deception Island is a volcanic island. So you have these dark hues of the soil. So you have these black and dark browns of the soil. And when it's filled with snow, it actually looks amazing because you get to see these beautiful patterns forming all of very abstract patterns forming all over the island. That's one of the few sunsets. Sunsets are very tough in Antarctica because the weather generally tends to get cloudy in summers. But there are times when you actually see beautiful colors in the sky as well. Of course, a lot of ice, lot and lots of ice out there. Icebergs. It could be the ends of glaciers, the mouths of glaciers. And this photograph was taken early in the morning, I think around 2:30 a.m., something like that. It was post sunset, before sunrise. Because we're going in summer, there's really no dark timing as such. Uh, your sunset happens almost around midnight, your sunrise happens around 3 o'clock. So between that is all twilight. So you're literally, having, so all the days that you're in Antarctica, you are going to have light all through. A lot of icebergs. Some of the bays where there's a lot of glaciers, you get to see a lot of these tiny icebergs floating all around the place. And yeah, like I said, sometimes you get beautiful sunsets as well. One of those few evenings, I think this was the last day of my first expedition where we was heading out of Antarctica and we had this beautiful clear sky, pink hues in the sky. It was one of those outstanding days to be there. So I'll take a short pause here, and if you have any questions, either put it in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, I see some conversation happening in chats, which is good.
Is there any mishap that has happened in Drake Passage in last few years?
Nothing major that I can think of. I think a couple of years back there was I think last season, I think there was a ship where I think the waves had crashed through and I think that severely injured somebody and they had to head
Mm-hmm.
back, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are few, very, very few and far in between.
Okay.
But then, of course, yeah, I think ultimately the whole thing about Antarctica is that it is an adventure. So, while we're going to be in probably the safest of vessels that there can ever be, uh, yeah, these things I think once in a while you never know, not.
Sriram, there is a
Shrikant,
question. Do they
yeah,
allow you to, stay overnight on those landing points?
No. So each of those landing points, you basically get 2 hours to go around the place. So let me give a quick background on that. So Antarctica, all these expedition companies are part of an organization called IATO, and because Antarctica is not governed by any country or whatever, and there's no laws as such for Antarctica. So what IATO does is they've created a whole bunch of self-regulated guidelines with which they operate these expeditions. The whole idea of it is to make sure that the tourism remains sustainable and doesn't and causes as minimal harm to Antarctica as possible. So one of the things that they do on all these landings is they there cannot be more than 100 people who are landing at any point of time at a particular landing site. So there cannot be more than 100 passengers on land at any point of time. So if it's a larger vessel, they typically take two shifts, or they kind of phase it in such a way that people go and they come back to the ship and the next group goes, kind of a thing. But typically in a small ship of maybe 100 to 120 people, 130 people, it typically is like everybody gets a chance to go there, visit that, and then move on to the next place. Uh, the only place, so there are a couple of these landing points which are specifically designated as camping sites. And that is an additional activity that is offered by these expedition companies, where you can spend one night of the expedition on one of these landing sites. So typically, people have an early dinner and they can head to this landing site, and you would get off there. And it's not like there's any construction or there's buildings or tents or whatsoever as such. What you do is you basically make a small hole kind of a thing in the snow. You take a shovel and you shovel out the snow so that you can put your, so they give you a body, what's called, I think it's called a baby bag. So they basically give you a baby bag to kind of cover yourself. It acts like a self-enclosing kind of a tent kind of thing, and you just lie down inside that piece of snow. So that kind of, or rather that hole in the snow, so that it kind of protects you from the wind and everything else. But that's the only time you can actually. It's more of what I would call like maybe an adventure camping kind of a thing that you get to do in Antarctica. Otherwise, it is pretty much like you have to get back to the ship. So you stay in the ship pretty much through the journey for all those 10 days.
Okay, thank you.
Srikant Sampath Kumar had a question. Does Adatar organize this expedition? Yes, Srikant, I will be talking about that towards the end of the presentation. We have something coming up in December this year.
I have a question. What kind of gear does one need to take there? Because, I mean, living here and traveling to normally cold places, one doesn't really have that kind of gear. Do you supply it, or do you supply anything that's like things that we don't own?
Right. So, Maxi, could you mute if it's okay,
Oh,
because
sorry.
there's a lot of echo. Yeah, thanks, Maxi. So, the two most important pieces of gear are actually loaned or given complimentary by most of these expedition companies. One is the parka that you used to wear on top. The parka typically comes with a lining for staying warm, and the outer shell, which is good for wind and for snow and stuff. So the parka is typically something that the expedition companies either like the Quark with whom we are going this time, they give it complimentary. There are some expedition companies that loan it for the duration of the trip. The other important thing that all these companies loan out is the gum boots. So there are these gum boots that will, because some of these landings we land in water, so you need gum boots that come up to at least knee length. And these guys have these very good grip gum boots that they give, which also helps you walk through the snow and stuff. Now, from a personal perspective, there are a few things that you will have to get, which is basically like a good woolen cap kind of a thing to cover your head and stuff. Uh, Good to have gloves, of course, because it can get really cold, and a waterproof pant kind of thing, so that because we'll be walking through snow quite a bit. just to make sure that you don't get cold down there. But uh, apart from that, it's just the usual stuff because the ship is anyway going to be quite warm. The ship is maintained at a temperature of about 20 degrees or 15 degrees, something like that. So it's actually quite warm inside the ship. It's only when we head out on these expeditions that we need, and it's not a very big list of gear that we need for it. Does that answer your question?
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to ask a question regarding the photography equipment. How do we go about that? Because the temperatures are so extreme, and like I'm not too sure like how much will one's camera be able to sustain the cold and the weather and all those things. Like, how do we go about that when we're going to such extreme climate and regarding whatever photography equipment and gears and all we have to take? So what do you advise on that, please?
So Simran, the temperatures are again exactly not very cold at that point. It goes to about -5, and I've never seen or I've not really seen camera gear go whatever fail in these circumstances. But it's not really very cold. Most of these gear is built to handle much lower temperatures as such. So that shouldn't really be an issue at all because I have shot even with my old DSLRs and lenses. I have shot with snow falling all over my camera and lens for like a couple of hours, and thankfully nothing ever happened to the equipment. They kept shooting after that, so I kept shooting for the next 4 or 5 days, and nothing really ever happened. So there's typically no issues because it's not that cold for camera systems to actually fail over there as such. But then it's always like whenever you're going to a place like this that is so extreme, that is, uh, that's a place where you cannot really get replacement. It's always good to have a second camera with you so that just in case, because failures need not happen just because of the weather or because of the temperatures. It could also be that by chance, say for whatever reason, the camera just gets dunked in the water or something like that. It is always good to have a backup. So I would advise any expedition, whether it be Antarctica or any expedition where you're going to a remote place, it's just better to carry a backup. But otherwise, it shouldn't really be an issue at all.
Hello, everybody. Swatha this side. I just wanted to know are people able to interact with the wildlife there? Are you allowed to go near them?
Uh, you are not. So technically, again, the rules say that you need to be about a couple of meters away from the wildlife. So
Okay.
so most of the wildlife that we have there, if you take the birds and all, they're not really like very shy of people at all because they've not seen people. Most of them have never seen people apart from the last 200 years, and they're quite trusting. So one of the things that is set as a guideline is to stay a few meters away from all this, from all the wildlife. If it approaches you, try to see if you can take a step back, so that you maintain that distance because uh, we could be carrying pathogens that may not be good for this wildlife as well. So you also don't want to have that things getting passed over to the wildlife. So it's always good to maintain that and to kind of avoid any kind of accidents as such. There's only a couple of animals which can be really dangerous as such. Couple of species of seals and stuff, which you can get close to and get bitten and whatever stuff. So for them, of course, you have to maintain a much longer distance as such. So what the expedition team typically does is wherever there is, say, like a colony of seals resting or a colony of penguins which is nesting, wherever they have these nesting areas, they kind of cordon it off with poles which say that you're not supposed to enter inside that periphery so that you maintain safe distance and you can watch wildlife nicely there.
Okay. Did you experience whales? Were you able to see whales there?
Oh, plenty. Last time I think we saw quite a few. We stopped counting after a point of time, but there
What kind
are
of whales? Like they have humpback or what sort of whales do they have?
mostly
Like,
humpback. A
hmm.
few people from the group. So the thing with whales is humpbacks are the most, how would I say that? They're the most visible whales because they're very playful. They keep coming out. They're also in good numbers. So a lot of these areas that we go to for the zodiac expeditions or for the expeditions, humpback whales are typically there. So we get to see them fairly often. Uh, the others tend to be fairly shy. Like so, like last expedition, I think people from our group saw minke whales. They saw fin whales. Uh, I think they also saw orcas or killer whales and stuff. But then these animals tend to be quite shy. So all you get to see is typically like a fin kind of a thing, just coming up and going into the ocean. So typically, so humpbacks are the most visible as such, but you can get to see other species as well.
Okay, thank you.
Divya asked, can the gear we need be picked up in Ushuaia? Divya, I would suggest to pick everything up here and take it to Ushuaia because Ushuaia is like crazy expensive for some reason. As in, they charge about 4-5 times of what the gear costs here or even in the US kind of a thing. So it's better to either pick it up here or if somebody's coming back from the US, you can actually get it from there. That's what I would recommend. Ushuaia tends to be prohibitively expensive for this thing. And do we need meet the research? Abhijit asks, do we meet the researchers doing field work there? What kind of research happens there? So most of the expedition crew on the ships that we go with have worked in some field of research there or the other. So they are fairly familiar with the content. So although they are currently not probably working on that, or they would be doing that after the expedition season, you could interact with them and get get an idea of what all happens there. So there are historians, there are people who work on ice, there are people who are into geology, there are people who are into whales, seals, birds, literally everything. So there's a whole lot of questions that you can actually get answers to on the ship as well. In terms of the research stations in Antarctica, we sometimes land near a couple of research stations, but it's not a guarantee that you'll meet researchers or speak to them or interact with them on a longer basis as such. So because they would be either in their work or they may not really be welcoming of so many people kind of coming and asking them about stuff. So that is something that may or may not happen, but definitely the people on the ship are very, very well versed because a lot of them have actually worked there. I think a couple of people I've met on these ships have wintered through Antarctica and they have these videos of whatever, just stepping out and throwing a can of boiling water, which almost freezes the moment it reaches the tip of the mug kind of a thing. So it's quite cool. But these guys, a lot of people who work on a whole lot of scientific areas over there. Cool. So what we'll do is keep the questions coming on the chat. What we'll do is I'll go through the rest of the presentation, which also answers some of these questions that are coming up. And at the end of the presentation, let's have another session of questions. Right? So maybe another 15 minutes is what I'll probably need for the presentation. Then we can take the questions. Right? But if you have anything, just feel free to put it in the chat and I will answer them once we're done with the presentation. So quick thing, like we talked about the icy landscapes of Antarctica and stuff. Now, one of the reasons that Antarctica has been in the news for a very long time is, of course, it's the impact of climate change. And a lot of the climate change that happens in Antarctica is because of activities that are happening far away from there. What we do here in Bangalore probably impacts Antarctica in a very, very big way as well. And that's whatever else we do in the world in terms of emissions or everything, all of this has an impact on Antarctica. So there are NASA studies that say that 118 gigatons of ice is being lost over the last 16 years every year. And they account for about half an inch of rise in sea levels from 2003 to 2019. And Antarctic Peninsula, every year we hear news that this is the hottest year in record for Antarctic Peninsula and so on and so forth. Why is this important? Why is Antarctica so important from a climate change perspective? Is because the amount of water that is held in the Antarctic ice sheet is equivalent to about 70 meters in the Earth's oceans. So the thing with climate change is a lot of us talk about melting of glaciers, melting of things, right? Uh, in the North Pole, in the Arctic, or around the North Pole, in the Arctic, most of the ice, if you leave aside the Greenland ice sheet, most of the ice is already in the sea. So ice melting in the Arctic, of course, it has a lot of impact on the ecology. It has a lot of impact on the planet and stuff. But sea level rise is rather limited because it's already been accounted for. Yeah, because all that ice is sitting inside the sea. The North Pole is just a point in the sea, right? Whereas in the southern hemisphere, Antarctica is a continent. It's a continent on which there is ice. So all this ice is actually sitting on land. So this ice sheet that is equivalent to 70 meters of the Earth's ocean is all sitting on land. And imagine all that melting. We're going to have 70 meters of rise of oceans. And I wouldn't even want to imagine what the impact of that is going to be on the land masses. So the Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 nations initially on December 1st, 1959. It came into force in 1961, and today 54 countries, including India, are party to the treaty. And what does the treaty say? The treaty basically says all the area south of 60 degrees south latitude, uh, it applies to that, and it's a very short treaty, but one of the most successful international agreements. It's basically says that Antarctica is not governed by anybody. It's although a lot of countries have claims on different territories of Antarctica, it has to be used for peaceful purposes, only to conduct scientific research, and there needs to be international scientific cooperation. So there's got to be free movement of research plans, results, personnel, no enhancement or diminishing of territorial claims. A lot of countries like Argentina, Chile, a lot of these countries have territorial claims on different parts of Antarctica, and they cannot be enhanced or diminished from the treaty time. And no nuclear explosions, radioactive waste, provides inspection by observers, uh, things like that. So there's a whole lot of things that have come in due to the time. This has been a super successful treaty in the sense that Antarctica is not open for commercial exploitation. It can only be used for peaceful purposes. It can be used for research. It can be used for tourism, but that's about it. You cannot do any of this, any of the industrial stuff in Antarctica as such, or military stuff for that. And of course, being the world's last wilderness, as I would like to call it, because there's very few wildernesses left out there. You actually start seeing wherever you go in Antarctica, you start seeing a whole lot of animals, and most of them tend to be penguins. And they're like literally all over the place. Now, let me pull up another quick poll. Yeah, so I have a poll out there which says, are penguins found only in Antarctica? Yes and no. Okay, answers coming in. 2 people say yes, 6 people say no. 7 people say no. I'm just going to keep it on for another 5 seconds. So if you've not voted, please put it in. I don't see who's voting, so it's a... Okay, excellent. So again, good. A lot of people have said no, which is the right answer, because you have only 6 species of penguins that are found in Antarctica. You have the chinstrap, you have emperor, you have gentoo, adley, king, and macaroni. Emperor penguins are found in a much more remote, emperor and macaroni, in fact, are found in a much more remote part of Antarctica, which needs helicopters. And in a few years back, it needed nuclear icebreakers, but today some of the ships are able to get much closer because of better ice classes, and they're able to take the helicopters and see emperor penguins. But that's a wholly different trip. King penguins are found mostly um, in South Georgia. That's where they are mostly found. But of course, South Georgia is also considered to be part of the Antarctic ecosystem. The ones that we see mainly are 3 of them. which is chinstrap, gentoo, and adelie. And we'll have a quick look at them. All of them are called brush-tailed penguins. You can see why the tails are like really stiff, uh, like a brush would be, I guess. Adelie is, I think, like a super cute looking one because of that white eye ring that is around the eye with a black hood. And I've seen massive colonies. I think one of the places that we went to on Brown Bluff, there was like this huge colony, and it was almost like a never-ending colony. But again, these are probably among the rarer of the three species of penguins across the peninsula as such. That's again one of my favorite pictures of a penguin. Chin strap, the name is fairly straightforward. That line that almost looks like a somebody wearing a helmet with a chin strap. All these penguins are about 2 feet plus in height, so they kind of come up to about the waist height kind of thing. Uh, they're all about 2 feet tall, 2.5 feet tall. And chin straps, I found sometimes they make the most amazing of nesting colonies. They find these beautiful places with this nice elevation, looking out into the sea, looking out at mountains for their nesting colonies. And this was Deception Island on another year where there was not much ice, but the entire landscape was filled with this beautiful green color moss, I think. And this was from an altitude we were seeing a lot of these chin straps, they wanted to go into the sea. And it's actually quite funny when penguins want to go into the sea because they take a long time to evaluate whether it is safe enough to go into the sea. They almost take like forever to figure out if they want to step in or not. And it's quite interesting watching them make that decision making, struggle with that decision making. And Gentoo is the third species of penguin. These are by far the most common. And it is said that with global warming, the Gentoo colonies are actually extending further south in Antarctica over the last 50 years or so. I think there are 4 different uh, subspecies or clades of Gentoo, if you will, that are found in South America, in South Georgia, in Antarctica as such. Uh, with minor difference, some people call them different species, some people call them different clades, but there are different kinds of Gentoo penguins that are found in these different places. And like I said, they are like everywhere. And they have this, all penguins do this, but they have this super ability to just jump out of the sea. And this is almost like what? It's over 3 feet high or 4 feet high. It just comes straight out of the sea. There is nothing there for it to stand on. It just shoots out of the sea and comes onto the land. That's one of the craziest sights you can actually see with penguins. Yeah, sometimes very, very nice views from their apartments. And this is a view of again of the penguin highways that I talked about much earlier in the presentation, where they make these uh, paths through the snow so that they can walk up and down to their nesting colonies fairly easily. Typically, what happens is because the snow melts on the higher reaches first, a lot of the higher rocky reaches is where the snow melts. The penguins that start nesting early, they start nesting right at the top of the hill. So they have to make these long journeys from their nests all the way to the ocean. Sometimes you wonder how they do it like so many times every day, but it's quite fascinating to watch them walk. Uh, Typically, December is an early season to see young ones, but we've been fortunate a couple of times to see nests with young ones of Gentoo penguins, especially in some of these places in December. And it's not just penguins, there's a whole lot of other birds that call Antarctica home. There's something called the sheathbill. And it looks like a harmless chicken kind of a thing, but these are predators of penguin eggs largely. So these guys would calmly go and pick up a penguin egg and just take it out of the colony, come back. And these guys can fly. So anything that flies in Antarctica, there are some kind of a predator of um, uh, penguins or penguin eggs or something like that. Of course, there's a few exceptions there, but most of them tend to be like that. South Polar skua, again, notorious. for going after injured penguins or young penguins or penguin eggs. Kelp gulls, giant petrels. These are kind of like Antarctica doesn't have any raptors, so these are like the eagles or raptors of Antarctica as such. Yeah, it's one of the penguin skulls we had found. This is probably an exception. The cormorants hunt for food, so they hunt for fish, so they dive into the Antarctic waters and fish and come back. So that's why you see the white and the black, and I think that's a similar shading of colors even in the penguins, where the belly is white and the back and the wings are black, because when a predator sees them from below, they kind of get camouflaged against the sky, and so it kind of appears white and white. When a predator sees them from above inside the water, it'll all be black along with the ocean floor, so it kind of helps them escape predators. Then you have Antarctic terns. Again, these are very, very graceful birds in their flight and very expert fishers as well. Cape petrels, and these are one of my favorite birds because they are just all around. They start off all the way in Ushuaia, they reach all the way to Antarctica and back. And a lot of times they're just shadowing your ship all the time. Beautiful black and white birds, small birds. Then, of course, you have seals. Typically, the leopard seal is probably one of the rarer of the lots that we tend to see in Antarctica. I think last expedition, a couple of groups were really lucky to find very good sightings of leopard seals, but these are by far the toughest. These are also the most voracious predators of penguins. So leopard seals just go after penguins. They are probably the biggest threat to penguins anywhere in the Antarctic waters. Yeah, this guy almost seems to have like a big smile on the face when he's resting, but yeah. Then you have crab-eater seals. Crab-eater seals are kind of misnamed. They don't eat crabs. They feed on krill. Krill are these small crustaceans that you find in billions and trillions around the Antarctic waters. That's what makes them rich. Krill is why you have so many whales and so many seals around Antarctica. Uh, Crab-eater seals are also supposed to be the most numerous species of seal in the world. I think the estimates range from some 7 million to some 75 million or something, so 80 million or something like that. So there's a lot of individuals, and you can actually see them all around the place as such. That red that you see on on the body of the seal, or dripping from the icicles, it is from the krill. So the krill have this pinkish red color, and that kind of is one of the more common colors on the ice in Antarctica, whether it be on crab-eater seals or whether it be in penguin colonies. Crab-eater seals are really like very, very nice. When they're floating around in the water or whether they're lounging around, they're very photogenic. They give some very nice locations as well. Weddell seal is the other species of seal that we again find around the Antarctic peninsula. The largest of them is the southern elephant seal. These guys are, I think, the largest land carnivores, or partly land carnivores, or rather, the adult males can weigh a few tons. Really, really huge. Like when they stand up with just the half of their body, they tower over people. Really, really massive, and they seem to have quite a bit of a temper in general. So you'll either see them sleeping or fighting. And it just doesn't stop with the adults. Sometimes these young ones were hardly a few feet long and they were already squabbling with each other in this tiny pool of water. And like someone asked, whales. So we tend to see a lot of whales around. So apparently, at one point of time, before the sealing and the whaling started in Antarctica waters, where the initial explorers reached, they couldn't sleep at night, or they couldn't sleep on their boats because there were so many whales, and the sound of the whales used to be so loud. Unfortunately, that's not the case today, but we still tend to hear a lot of whale song, especially when they are around the ship and stuff. That's a humpback whale. Uh, we tend to see them around the Antarctic waters. Dusky dolphins, again, this is like back to Ushuaia. So when you're getting back into the Beagle Channel, they're typically welcomed by dolphins. Dusky dolphins tend to be one of the more common species again there. So yeah, so that's from the expeditions that we did in 2018 and 2023. So yeah, so that was about Antarctica and my expeditions so far and what I have seen so far. Uh, we have an expedition that Darter is organizing along with Quark Expeditions on December 1st to 11th this year. It's an 11-day Antarctic Peninsula expedition where we'll start at Ushuaia and we will go down the Drake Passage. We will go around Antarctic Peninsula and the South Shetland Islands, and we will come back up the Drake Passage to Ushuaia. And I'll be on the trip. I'll be guiding in terms of photography as well as all the travel suggestions, guidelines, everything that is needed for the trip. There's going to be a lot of course, in addition to my sessions and stuff, there's going to be a lot of talks and field excursions by experienced expedition team. I've spoken about them. And of course, yeah, it is a journey to another world as such. That's the ship we'll be using. This is a fairly new ship. It's been around for the last 2 years, 2 seasons, I think. And it's got this modern technology with something called the Alstein X bow, which apparently reduces a lot of vibrations, noise, and impact, especially during the Drake passage. So it makes the passage a lot more comfortable. What I really like about this ship, which is very different from most of the other ships that operate in Antarctica, is it's got a smaller capacity. It's a capacity of 138 guests. So uh, there are a lot of activities that happen in Antarctica. So you have something called the kayaking activity also that happens where you can opt to just do kayaking through the journey, which means that everybody who's on the ship can be out at the same time. So we go to a particular place in 2 hours, we finish, or 2 or 3 hours. All of us are out there, we explore the area, we come back to the ship, and we can quickly move to the next uh, landing point. So that gives us an advantage in terms of traveling larger distances, seeing more diverse landing points as well, in addition to it being like a nice small capacity thing. And we've chosen this middle veranda stateroom, and these are all cabins which come with an attached balcony. It is on deck 4, so it's a little lower, and it's in the middle of the ship. So which makes it so the lower you are on the ship, the lesser the movement. So on the Drake Passage, or if there is swell in the sea, the higher you are on the ship, of course, you're going to have a lot more movement, so a lot more prone to seasickness. When you're much lower down, seasickness also is a lot better. It can be managed way better. So I prefer a lower deck for sure. And given that they all have balconies, once you're in Antarctica, if you're not out on an excursion, you can always, just sit in the balcony and enjoy the views, or there's plenty of observation decks in the front of the vessel, in the back of the vessel, on the top of the vessel. So enough places for you to just lounge around and watch Antarctica for those 10 days. That's one of the pictures of the room with the veranda outside. Uh, all of them come in configurations of either a twin bed or a double bed, so that is something that can be customized. That's not a problem. And of course, the good part about this voyage, and I think for the next season, at least Quark has added a few more things. One is, of course, the trip insurance worth, I think, about $500,000 is included in the package. So you don't have to, it's very tough. And that's been one of the big challenges for me in all these expeditions, is to find a company that covers offshore expeditions. And I think with this being included, it's actually a fantastic thing. So you just need to get your regular travel insurance for your travel to Ushuaia and back. And the trip insurance is included in the Quark package. They also included a complimentary standard Wi-Fi package. Now, I think it would be some limit on the amount of data that you can use. Again, comes with a lot of riders, but it's good to have some kind of Wi-Fi connectivity if you need to just communicate back to family and stuff. And complimentary range of alcohol, I think, during bar hours and dinner. I think this is something that they've introduced again in this season. And yeah, so I have the details of this expedition on the website. I'll share it with everybody who signed up for this talk. I'll be sending out an email after the talk with the details of where you can find details of the expedition and how you can sign up and stuff. So if you sign up before March 25th, we have a special offer on the list price. So we have a good deal that we worked out with Quark for all signups before the end of the month. So you can sign up with about 30% of the tour fee by the end of the month, and the other 70% will be due by around July 15th. So yeah, if you need any more details or whatever, of course, you can feel free to reach out to us through any of the methods I've mentioned. So I think I'll pause here on the presentation. I don't have too many more slides, but I will open it up for questions again. So you can just either unmute yourself or put it in chat. I leave it to you.
Shreeram, I have a question. Can we
Mhm.
fly a drone there?
No, so drones are not allowed in Antarctica again as per IATA guidelines. So unless there is a long process to be able to fly a drone, but just kind of consider it that unless you're doing it for either some research purpose or something like that, it is not allowed.
Okay. And when we talk about food and everything, vegetarian food is available, right?
But yeah. So okay, I actually completely forgot about the food. And so the travel in these expedition ships is actually fairly luxurious. You've seen the rooms. The food is again fairly elaborate, and they take care of all your needs. Like the first time I went there, I was the only Indian and the only other vegetarian on the ship. So they actually made an entire menu for me every day. And to my luck, the sous chef happened to be from Chennai. So I happened to eat dosa, samosa, biryani, and everything on in Antarctica. So that was super cool. Uh, but the other two times that we've been there, there's been a whole range of dietary choices or dietary restrictions, and they were very, they were very welcoming in terms of honoring all of that. So food is not an issue at all. Whether you're a vegetarian, whether you have any constraints, everything gets taken care of fairly easily. So when you sign up for the tour, that's one of the things that we asked for, which is dietary preferences and restrictions, so that the ship can be informed accordingly.
Thank you. So vegetarian people won't die, right?
No, not at all. You're not going to be asked to go and hunt penguins or something. So
Oh yeah, thanks. That would be nice.
Vijay Shri had a question.
Can I ask a question to them?
Yes, Vidya.
So, regarding this, if we pay up now, and in the eventuality, in case we have to cancel, is there a what is the refund?
I will send you those details along with
Okay.
the email.
And also, is there any way that we can get single cabins? I mean, I know you told me they're booked out, but there could be others who may release or cancel or whatever.
Yes, so I've already put in a request for that. So let's see if any of them gets released, I'll let you know. But yeah, otherwise, anyways, like I mentioned, for single occupancy, they typically charge about 70% of the fee. But I'm also trying to see if we can get a single cabin. I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, and the last thing, could you email me or WhatsApp me the list of gear that we need to carry, because I'm traveling now to Australia and I'll just pick it up there.
Okay, I will do that.
Please.
I'll send you a PDF. So when I send out the email, I'll also have a PDF from Quark about the expedition as such. So that has an entire checklist of all the things that you will need for the expedition. So you can actually just go through that and pick up whatever you don't have.
Super. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, I hope all these cruise expeditions are sustainable and doing as less harm as possible.
So so every year on year, a lot of these expedition companies are getting on new vessels. So like this one is a couple of years old and stuff. So they're all getting more fuel efficient engines, more less polluting engines and stuff like that. There is I wouldn't want to kind of say that there is absolutely zero impact. There is, I'm sure there is some impact of tourism, going to Antarctica and coming back. But then I think there are a couple of things. One is us being here, the amount of impact that we're having on Antarctica is, of course, a lot more. The other thing, of course, is that a journey to a place like this, I feel at least, and this is something I've experienced myself, and I've seen a lot of my co-passengers experience, is when you go there, when you're traveling for those 10 days, you're talking to people who have seen Antarctica for the last 5, 10, 20 years, and they've seen the impact that that global warming has had on Antarctica as such. It is one of the ways that actually changes your paradigms about global warming as such. It's a lot more. It becomes a lot more personal. You start understanding what is actually happening out there and things. So it's a great way to also educate ourselves about the state of the planet as such. So while, yeah, so there is some impact, and the impact is being minimized in a lot of ways. Like, for example, there's no trash that is supposed to be left behind in Antarctica at all. So whatever the ship carries from Ushuaia goes back to Ushuaia as such. Even when when you go out on excursions, they don't let you take. Uh, they are particular to the point of thing that you're not supposed to carry water bottles with plastic labels on them, because the labels can come off and fly away. Uh, Before and after you come back from a land excursion, you're supposed to walk through this chemical solution kind of a thing, so that all the microbes, everything gets completely, they all completely die. So you're not carrying microbes from one landing site to another landing site. So there's a lot of these precautions that are taken. In fact, last year there was a rule where they said that we cannot even put our camera bags on the ground. They said you have to keep it above, because there was some scare of bird flu and all that was happening. I think there was recently an article about that as well. But they kind of try to ensure that the impact, both in terms of sustainability and global warming, as well as impact in terms of biodiversity, is minimized on these expeditions.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Vijayashri has had her hand raised for a while. Vijayashri, would you like to ask a question? So somebody has asked if I'll be sharing the recording. Yes, I'll have the recording. I'll put it up on YouTube, and I'll share that also along with it. Mhm. Any other questions? Sounds good then. Thanks everyone again then for joining me on taking time out and joining me on the Sunday evening for this talk. Like I said, I'll send out the details of the expedition to everyone who signed up for this talk. And of course, if you have any questions, anything that comes to your mind, please feel free to reach out to me. Just either drop me a message or just give me a call, or and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. And I'm really, really hoping to see a few of you on the trip in December. Thank you. So I'm going to be stopping the share.